I am pleased to present Marko Papić, a close friend.
Merci à François et Claude. J'ai habité ici, à Montréal, pour 8 ans. BCA Research est une entreprise québécoise. Mais maintenant, malheureusement, j'habite à Californie. Et vous avez raison, François, Vicente, j'ai beaucoup de Air Miles, mais ma cour est toujours ici, à Québec. Maintenant, je dois parler en anglais, mais il y a des questions en français. Vous pouvez me demander en français. In your career, in your life, you're going to have a lot of people who influenced your life, a lot of fathers. You have your actual father, who obviously, hopefully, teaches you a lot of different things. You have somebody who helped you in athletics, a coach, somebody who is your intellectual mentor, professional mentor. And then you have people who introduce you to a culture in a place. And for me, that was Claude. So he was somebody who took, I don't know why, but he took a liking in this kid that came out of who even knows where and moved to Montreal. And I always enjoyed our lunches. They meant a lot to me. And you introduced me to Quebec. So thank you for that, as he probably did for a lot of you as well. It's such a pleasure to be back here and speaking. My house in Saint-Lambert was just over there, like literally. Like you could walk from here. So this is a special place for me. Except when the F1 happens. Because it sounded like a million bees were descending upon my house. Okay, so there's a lot of things to talk about. I'm not going to talk about how to make money in the next 6 to 12 months. So if you want to know how to make money in the next 6 to 12 months, the title of my tactical view is Don't Fight the Trump. If you want to hear more about that, you're going to have to come to my lunch on Tuesday. And Tatiana, she's somewhere here. Tatiana can get you a spot. Maybe, I don't know. There's not that much room. We're not going to talk about what a lot of people want to talk about, which is geopolitics in a very, very simplistic sense. Sorry, just going to go through that. So we're not going to talk about that either. We're not going to talk about Ukraine. We're not going to talk about Russia. If you want to see these slides, you're going to have to, again, come on Tuesday. Today I want to talk about something that really nobody really thinks about, which is how do you integrate geopolitics into asset allocation in a sustainable way? When I visit with most long-term clients, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, often there's this sense that geopolitics is something that's exogenous, that falls out of the sky. And when it does so, it impacts your portfolio in a very ephemeral way. And the reality is that's true. You should almost always fade geopolitics. I wrote a whole book on that, Geopolitical Alpha. How do you generate geopolitical alpha? By ignoring it. There's this new meme that the Gen Z has figured out, which is brilliant. Nothing ever happens. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about. It's true. How did dad make money? He just didn't react. Right? That's just the new meme. And it's in many ways tactically, from a tactical asset allocation perspective, yes, you are right. Geopolitics doesn't matter. C'est ça, goodbye. Right? Well, on a 5-year trajectory, however, I would say that most institutional clients of mine are absolutely wrong. On a 5 to 10-year horizon, they believe that strategic asset allocation is something that they went to school for, something that they got a CFA or a Kaya certificate for. That this is their domain, and therefore, I don't need to really talk about it. Go back to the Russia-Ukraine slides. That's what we want. Except that's not what I'm going to talk about. Because, again, that's ephemeral. On a 5 to 10-year horizon, that's actually where geopolitics matters. And not in sort of a petty way where I'm going to stand here and talk about Donald Trump, but more from a systemic perspective. And so what I want to spend time on, and I'm going to, I guess, cycle through these again just to show you what you're missing. Yet again. Encore une fois, okay, there we go. What I want to talk about is how has the world changed, and what does that actually mean to long-term asset allocation? So, I know you all came here to talk about Trump. We can do that a little bit. We can do a Q&A. I'm very good at comedy, We'll talk about him here and there. Unfortunately, first I want to tell you something that's Trump-proof. My view does not depend on President Trump staying in power. My view is a 5 to 10-year view of how the world has changed and what does it mean for investors. First and foremost, what is the world we're leaving? We're leaving the world that, economists and commentators have called the Great Moderation. Great Moderation was not just inflation coming down from the 70s. The Great Moderation was really, as you can see on this chart, the volatility of outcomes when it comes to growth and inflation came down. So to the point that volatility is back, completely agree, and it's going to stay here. We actually have a great chart at BCA Research that shows that S&P 500 is reaching all-time highs at a higher level of volatility. So volatility is not just back, but it's not also bad. It just is. Now, Great Moderation was really underpinned by two forces. One was the dominance of laissez-faire economics, the Reagan-Thatcher revolution, that took the government out of the economy. So you didn't have to introduce the government into your analysis. You did not necessarily need Alex research in 1990s. That's kind of the point. Everything was like, meh, Bob Dole versus Clinton. Ooh, what does it mean for investors? Nothing. Third way dominated the left, and on the right, everybody subscribed to the tenets of laissez-faire. And in the geopolitical sense, and I want to really focus on the geopolitics, America was running an empire, a unipolar world. Unipolarity is great. You've got one big bully taking everyone's lunch money. But the great thing about it is it crushes volatility. Like from a non-normative, non-moralistic perspective, it's great to be dominated by an empire. Whether it's America, China, an alien life force that enslaves us, it doesn't matter. As investors, we want that security, that knowledge that you know where the world is going. That's where we got the Great Moderation. Now, what does multipolarity look like? When there is no single bully and there's no clear two bullies, what does that look like? Political scientists talk about this a lot. A multipolar system is one that's in a disequilibrium. So I've been showing this chart. Many of you have seen me show it before. Basically, when I moved to Montreal, is right there where it says the end of American hegemony. That's when I moved to Montreal. That's when I showed this chart first time. And I said, look, this is going to explode upwards. I didn't doctor this data. This is a university in Sweden that monitors conflict around the world. And as political science theory teaches us, a multipolar world is more likely to generate geopolitical conflict purely because there's more players to play the game. Instead of just one country or two countries, it's multiple. Now, you're sitting there and saying, okay, cool, got it, multipolar world, more conflict. I should, buy some defense stocks, expect higher inflation maybe. No, forget it. That's not what I'm here to talk about. That's silly. That's simple. It's more complicated than that. And it's more complicated than that because in a multipolar world, yes, there's more conflict. Tragically, more probability of people dying in a war, so that's true. However, there's certain other things that occur in a multipolar world. First and foremost is diversification. Of what? Of everything. This chart shows the Herfindahl-Hirschman index of military procurement around the world, which is a mouthful. So let me explain what it means. It goes back to 1945, and it shows all the decisions to procure military weapons across the world, across all countries, and it measures their concentration. How much are these decisions coming from 1, 2, 3, or multiple countries? As you would expect, in a bipolar world, concentration is relatively high because you only have two sellers that you should be buying weapons from. In a unipolar world, there's only one. In a multipolar one, the concentration collapses because countries are diversifying their defense portfolio. It's not smart to become overly addicted to a single supplier. And by the way, why did I choose military procurement to create this index on? Because it's the most geopolitical decision. It's pure. A fighter jet is not just a fighter jet. It's a 15, 20, 30-year relationship with another country because of training, because of spare parts. So when you make that decision to buy an F-35, it's an important one. Maybe the Swedish Gripen makes more sense. I don't know. Just saying. Totally unrelated to anything going on. You guys are a tough crowd. That was a joke. All right. So that's one example. A few other examples. So countries are diversifying their portfolio. The other thing that they're doing is by diversifying your security portfolio, you're also diversifying your alliances, which means alliances are very weak. And this is the number one mistake every one of my institutional investment clients make. They show up and they say, Marko, make me an Excel spreadsheet, okay? I want a China tab and an America tab. Tell me where countries fit. Doesn't work that way in a multipolar world. Because alliances are very weak, countries are geopolitically promiscuous. And this is very, very important. It's important because as an allocator, you cannot have that Excel spreadsheet. And I tell my clients I'm not going to do it because it's a stupid request. You know, there's no stupid question. That is a stupid question. In a bipolar world, that makes sense. In a multipolar, it doesn't. And what that also means is that globalization does not collapse in a multipolar world. Political science shows us this. Game theory shows us this. Countries that are enemies with one another go to war they trade right until the day they go to war. This is another counterintuitive reality of this kind of an environment. Now, okay, but it's an unsustainable equilibrium, right? So this is just a 5-year thing. No. This is work by famous political scientists. Many of you have probably heard of him, very controversial on some issues, John Mersheimer. He's actually considered the father of offensive realism. His research shows that a multipolar world over the last 250 years, 170 out of the last 250, we've been in a multipolar world. So my clients also always ask me, okay, but what's next, right? China's next, bipolar, Cold War, China versus US. I'm like, no, this is it. You are where you are. Prepare for it. This higher volatility, Thailand and Cambodia going to war. You're like, what? I'm at a resort in Thailand. There's a war, you know? Yes, that's the world we live in. And no, it's not necessarily bearish. In fact, the last time we were in a multipolar world, from 1812 to 1914, the 1870 to 1914 was one of the best technological eras because of competition, because of war, because countries had to get serious about innovating and raising productivity and not necessarily producing apps that get you a cheeseburger after your date leaves at 3 a.m. Right? So that could be considered a poor allocation of capital from a competitive perspective in a multipolar world. Okay, but what does this mean for asset allocation? Great. It's not that bad. There'll be innovation. Globalization is not going to collapse. But what next? Well, first of all, I want to show you a chart. And the reason I got to show you this very messy chart that you can barely see, which is fine, you don't have to actually see it, is because my pet peeve is when people think geopolitics is war. It's not war. It's systemic setup of the planet. Think of geopolitics like hardware. You know, none of us actually know how to code. Like, let's be real. So, when we access our hardware, we do it through software. But geopolitics is the hardware upon which your entire asset allocation pyramid sits. You don't access it because you don't have to. How would you? You access it through trade and capital flows and asset prices. That's your software. But the hardware of the planet is geopolitics. And my message to you is that the hardware of the unipolar era is over. We've acquired a new hardware. It's multipolar. The problem is we didn't download, install, and restart our computer and download the new software. So this chart here, which is very difficult to see, which is okay. I don't want you to actually look at it very carefully. I want you to almost squint at it. It's a chart of current account balances going back to 225 years. And if you squint at it, just squint at it, what kind of sticks in your mind? What should stick in your mind is this tumorous growth at the far right. Throughout history of the last 225 years, countries have had current account surpluses and current account deficits. There's nothing wrong with having a current account deficit. So President Trump is absolutely wrong when he says that this is a problem for America. As I think it was Paul Krugman famously said, you don't have a trade surplus with your barber. I love that example. Your barber's making money off of you, and that doesn't mean you're poor. It means that he has something to give you, and you pay them. It's fine. So there's nothing wrong with having a current account deficit. or a surplus. The problem is that over the last 25 years, this has grown to extreme levels relative to history. Now, the period of time that I believe we're in is similar to the 19th century, where, yes, you had current account surpluses and deficits, but they weren't this leveraged to one country. So this is zooming in the last 25 years. You can see that many countries on the left produce stuff and sell to America, and then there's America buying it all. Effectively, again, this is a percent of global GDP. And what it shows is that the world is over-levered to America, which makes sense if you're an empire, and if this is a perk of being an empire, a perk to your vassal states. So think about America in 1995 or 2005. Costa Rica, Canada, China. What's the difference? Nothing. They're all your vassals. All of them. And so what do you do with your vassals? You give them access to your market, and they access it. And boom, you buy their goods, they get a lot of dollars, and then with those dollars, of course, they buy financial assets. So the flip side of this massive current account deficit is capital account surplus. Sorry, yes. So current account deficit and capital account surplus. So this is the chart. The bottom, the green, yes, America has twin deficits and has a trade deficit with the rest of the world, but it's effectively the world's sovereign wealth fund. And so the rest of the world has recycled these assets into the U.S. There's nothing wrong with this. Many have written about this. Michael Papić has been going on about this for 20 years. What I'm saying is that this is a product of a geopolitical world that we're no longer in. And the reason that it doesn't make sense to do this anymore is, first of all, I believe American voters have revolted against this arrangement by electing Donald Trump twice now. Donald Trump doesn't like it either, although for maybe the wrong reasons. But further than that, the bond market of the United States of America is not going to allow this to continue because it's very expensive. And finally, for the first time in the last 30 years, countries are starting to realize that they're over-levered to a country that's no longer willing to be magnanimous. It's shifting from magnanimity to Machiavellianism, as America should. In a way, yeah, it makes sense. In a multipolar world, it's kind of, as Jared Kushner famously said in early 2017, it's what have you done for me lately world. So if you're going to behave like that, the rest of the world will also start diversifying. So this is unsustainable and it's going to stop. And in my view, President Trump will get what he wants. He will be successful. He will narrow America's twin deficits. Golf clap, right? Well done. He will narrow America's twin deficit. But what he and his supporters maybe know, maybe don't know, I'm not quite sure. I think some of them do. Stephen Miran hints at this in his famous treatise, The User's Guide to, redrawing the global trade. That's going to require the top side to go down. So yes, as you narrow your current account deficit, you will have less dollar recycling in your economy. Now, how is America going to accomplish this? Well, first of all, as I hinted, the bond market is a constraint. The bond market is not going to finance America's twin deficits anymore. The chart on the right is hilarious. It's like straight up just funny. It's America versus Europe. General government net interest expense as percent of total revenue, not GDP. So it's how much is your credit card bill as percent of your tax income. So America spends 12% of all taxes it raises on interest expense. Europe is at 3%. So the first and foremost constraint to this is that the bond market wants something to be done. It wants the U.S. to effectively grow slower. You cannot have twin deficits as high as they are. In my view, the one big beautiful bill is a product of this constraint, which might be controversial in the room, but I don't see it as being stimulative at all. On the chart on the right, you can see that most of one big beautiful bill goes to extending the 2017 tax cut, which was $4.5 trillion. New tax cuts are about $600 billion over the next 10 years, which is a pittance for an economy the size of the U.S. The chart on the left shows you what happened with expectations of government spending. They went up when President Trump got elected. That's why we got a bond market riot from September to January. Trump is basically a human steepener. The bond market responded to that. But then the House of Representatives revolted against him and we got the one big beautiful bill, which I would rename as a modestly sized big. One modestly sized bill. It's not that big or beautiful. So Americans have already started to adjust to this. And the chart on the right shows you the tariff revenue over the next 10 years, which, this is based on 10% tariffs. We now know that it's much higher than that. So the bond market has already disciplined the U.S. when it comes to at least the fiscal side of this deficit. The second issue is the voters. The voters are starting to turn against what I have termed the Buenos Aires consensus, which I think is basically ending. The U.S. is shifting back towards more prudence. The dark line is the share of respondents who say that deficit reduction should be a top priority. It's not at the level where Obama and the Tea Party were when they cut the deficit from 10 to 3%, by the way, in a low-growth, low-inflationary environment. So yes, this can be done. No, it doesn't require Ronald Reagan. Obama and the Tea Party did it. Voters are already starting to agitate for that kind of policy. So the reason this is important is that when you think about American asset performance over the last 5 years, when you think about how America got to such a deep current account deficit, you think it has to do with American growth and insatiable appetite for goods. The reality is that I think it's been underpinned almost exclusively by the fiscal policy. So when I see the chart on the left, and it shows the contribution to cumulative real GDP growth from 2020 to 2024, the green side, the green line is output per hour. Says who? If I gave all of you $10 million and it just rained on your head, your output per hour on an Excel spreadsheet would look good too. So in my view, the performance of the U.S. over the last 5 years is massively driven by this fiscal policy. If fiscal policy is now, the second derivative is much less stimulative, U.S. is now going to have the outcomes it's had over the last 5 years, which will narrow its current account deficit, especially because tariffs have become a tool in which to solve both deficits. It's a way to raise revenue, deal with the fiscal deficit, and to lower the trade imbalance. So what does this mean for asset allocation over the next 5 years? Well, my thesis is the slowdown in U.S. fiscal policy, and specifically targeting of this empire role of being the consumer of last resort, is going to have second-order effects. Now, this is where we can disagree. Most of the things I'm talking about right now are facts. This is a forecast. If you're listening to everything I say and you agree, you're going to say, okay, cool, I get it. America's going to grow slower on average than it did over the last 5 years. But Marko, the rest of the world is going to grow even slower. And here in Canada, of course, we know the old adage, we were just talking about it, when America sneezes, Canada has pneumonia. Okay, so why would I be short dollar in this environment? Why would I expect the rest of the world to outperform? America grows slower, yeah, but it still has AI. It's still a place of entrepreneurship and so on. Like the rest of the world is in a much worse position. But that assumes that there's no second-order effect where policymakers in the rest of the world respond to the realities of what the U.S. is doing. Putting a consumption tax on imports, making it more difficult to field products in the American market, being more geopolitically judicious and thinking about national security. And on top of that, yes, spending less money and not spending like a drunken sailor. So what are European and Chinese policymakers going to do in that environment? Well, you could place a bet in your SAA that they're going to just say, oh, well, I guess we're going to all have to grow slower. Too bad. The American fiscal gravy train is over. Or, what I think is going to happen is they're going to ramp up. Because politically, it's difficult to just accept, oh, I guess the American fiscal gravy train is over. They're no longer a magnanimous empire. They're Machiavellian. We can't add our products to their market. We're going to just go somewhere else. I don't think that's going to happen. And it's not going to happen because Europe has fiscal space. Yes, it does. It's not just Germany. So yes, they will invest. And the bond market in China is begging Chinese policymakers to do something about low level of consumption. They're effectively stuck in secular stagnation we had to deal with after our GFC. Same situation. So Chinese and European policymakers, in my view, are not going to just rest on their laurels. They will respond to slower growth from the U.S., and they will boost growth in their economies. Again, totally rational, and it makes sense in a multipolar world that you diversify your portfolio of where your customers come from. I mean, this country, more than any country on the planet, should have been doing that for the past 20 years. Now it's going to have to do it faster. In a way, Donald Trump, as I joked at lunch, is cod liver oil. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Our grandparents used to drink it for its omega-3 properties. It's extremely stinky. It tastes terrible, but it's good for you. That's what Donald Trump is. He's extremely stinky. He tastes terrible, but he's actually good for the rest of the world. This is my view. And what we're seeing, like now, I was speaking theoretically, but let's be very specific. Germany has started to obviously spend a lot of money. And no, it's not just on defense. It's also on productive things like infrastructure. Europeans are looking to finally complete the single market, particularly in the services. So there's an M&A activity in telecommunication and banking coming along. And they've finally gotten serious about energy issues, and they're going to get lucky on that one because there's oversupply of LNG. So in my view, yes, Europe is absolutely taking matters into its own hands and is going to be a very interesting place to put capital over the next 5 years. Chinese policymakers, less empirical evidence, less conviction on China. However, they have a fourth plenum coming up. They just met at Beidahu, their summer retreat, and one of their priorities for the next 5-year plan in China is to boost consumption from 40% of GDP to 50%. Again, not because consumption's good, but because Americans are mean to you. You need to move some of that final demand from abroad where you don't control it domestically. Now, they're going to epically fail, just to be clear. You're not going to increase consumption in China from 40 to 50% in 5 years. That's not going to happen. But the effort itself is going to ensure that my outcome for SA comes true, which means global GDP is going to be flat. It's going to be the same, but its makeup is going to change. So what do I expect to happen for investors? These two charts. These two charts tell you where I think basically asset allocation is going to go over the next 5 years as we're downloading this new macro for the new geopolitical hardware. As this transition is happening, I believe that the U.S. will absolutely get crushed in terms of relative performance. Now, no, this doesn't mean that I'm bearish on S&P 500. Actually, I've been super bullish last 3 months. I'm not bearish in absolute terms, and neither should you. But in relative terms, I believe the performance you see on the left, which is since Trump's inauguration, is what's going to happen. And this was my call, by the way, from March of 2024. I've called President Trump, America first president, America last performance. Again, not because he's actually doing anything that wouldn't have happened anyways. By the way, this was inevitable. We're in a multipolar world. It's effectively geopolitically stupid to put all your eggs in the American basket, no matter who you are. This was always going to happen. But he's kind of catalyzing it really quickly. Now, the chart on the right is my view on the US dollar. The black line is the 2002 to 2007 trajectory, where the DXY basically ended at 80. The US dollar absolutely got pawned, as the kids would say, PWNED. Right? It's a gaming term. Clearly not a young crowd. Yeah. The US dollar got nuked. Nuked. You know? It was a joke. There was a movie. I think James Bond came out and some criminal is like, dollars? No, euros. The dollar's not what it used to be. It was hilarious because, it doesn't mean American exceptionalism is ending, by the way. The US dollar went down significantly from 2002 to 2007. Sources of growth and also narratives that we on the sell side pushed to you and that you bought pivoted from America to the rest of the world, Chinese industrialization, emerging markets, and so on. But the reality is that this was ultimately kind of beneficial for the U.S. However, I do think that this is going to happen again. And it's going to be a product of this adjustment to the reality of American policy. American policymakers, voters, and bond yields all want that green line to come down. So the current account deficit has to go down. It has to narrow. How are you going to do it? Well, how do you finance it? What is there to reverse? You can see how America finances its current account deficit. It's not FDI. It's not other things. It's portfolio investments. And by the way, a lot of you here in this room who are institutional allocators You also have a difficulty in listening to this because a lot of your allocation to this is in alternatives, things that are locked up. So you're going to even more, if I'm right, overemphasize the liquid stuff. And so, yeah, U.S. is going to continue to underperform as it has for the last 6 years. Now, 6 months. My bad. I saw someone go like, 6 years? What are you talking about? You clearly were not in Mag 7. Thank you. Thank you for the confused look on your face. Okay, a couple of more things I want to say on this. First of all, U.S. exceptionalism. Dumbest term I've ever heard. You know, it's really annoying. Stop using it. Right? So, why? Because this does not mean America is ending. From 2002 to 2007, U.S. dollar was monopoly money. Did America suffer during these 5 years? Literally everything that we own today in our PA was discovered from 2002 to 2007. So a temporary underperformance of American assets does not mean the U.S. economy is like going to fall off a cliff. From 2002 to 2007, if you were overweight U.S., you were no longer in this industry. Okay, you were updating your resume. That's how bad American performance was, and yet the United States of America discovered everything that now matters. So no, this story is not about the end of American exceptionalism. As I said, I promised you a Trump-proof view. I don't care who's the president of the United States of America. He's just catalyzed it and crystallized this and sped it up. I would have the exact same view if Harris was the president. So that's an important caveat to the story. The second issue is that this is not based on some sort of an increase in geopolitical volatility, as we talked both at lunch and as it's pretty clear. Geopolitical risks can actually abate in a multipolar world. And they can abate if it becomes a little bit more balanced. And I think that the Trump administration is doing exactly that. They're actually withdrawing the U.S. and accepting spheres of influence in the rest of the world, which means that the geopolitical risks around the world are not going to catalyze some sort of flight to safety. Now, how could I be wrong about all this? What would make my thesis on strategic asset allocation wrong? Two things. First, a geopolitical thing. I'm just wrong that it's a multipolar world. And in fact, everybody who's asking me those dumb questions is right. The world is going to become bipolar, and China is going to be the other half, because some geopolitical event suddenly thrusts the planet into clear peer-to-peer competition. Now, the reason that would be a challenge is because in that situation, even Donald Trump would reassert kind of a hegemonic role, which means that the U.S. would probably continue to carry a very deep current account deficit, and the rest of the world, at least the part that's allied with the U.S., would be more than happy to finance it. Meanwhile, China would be completely uninvestable. And this is why my number one geography for articulating my view is Europe, not China. So how do you articulate my thesis for the next 5 years? In my view, the highest view is Europe. China has a much higher potential to return positively. This year, it's actually outperforming Europe or anybody else. But I also believe China has very fat tails. And there is some probability, which is not zero, that policymakers in China make a mistake and, read the tea leaves wrong and invade Taiwan. If that happens, my thesis is wrong. We go into a bipolar world, and U.S. reasserts the role you saw on that 225-year chart. So no, you don't have portfolio outflows out of the U.S. And no, U.S. probably does cut its tariffs to its allies. That's a Cold War world. The other way that I can be wrong, oh, by the way, why is that not going to happen? Because the Chinese are, what's the word, not stupid. Yeah, that's why. That's why. Because it would be very bad for them. West united, it's not a competition. U.S., Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, you can't compete with that. Which is why President Xi has actually been very careful, very thought out. China has not supported Russia as much as the propaganda you're reading in the West tells you. You know, every time they shoot down a drone, a Russian drone, they're like, oh, look, Chinese technology is inside a drone. Well, I mean, Chinese semiconductors are in a Ukrainian drone too, okay? It's not like it's Canadian semiconductors, right? So relax. So in my view, that's not going to be why I'm wrong. But I could be wrong, you know? And the problem with China, obviously, has become a lot less meritocratic and much more authoritarian, and it's very difficult for me to stand in front of you and say, I know what President Xi is going to do. So, fat tails. The second way that I'll be wrong is an endogenous technological innovation inside the US that is captured just by America. Now, most of you are like, wait, that's called AI. That's why you're going to be wrong. Like, duh. Well, except that's not what AI is it now? When you fly to Canada from America, it's not like your ChatGPT app stops working. So the way I see hyperscalers are railroad companies, and they're awesome. They're going to print money. They're going to have rentier income for the next 20 years. But what DeepSeek told us is that the productization of that infrastructure is not exclusively American, neither is its use. You know, I mean, we had a gentleman who started an AI hedge fund here in Montreal from McGill. Russ. Yes, he's not here with us today, unfortunately, but, you know, like, sure you can talk to Claude about maybe allocating some money to him. It's a hedge fund in Montreal at McGill run on AI. Productization of AI, I don't think is going to be exclusively American. The shale revolution is a good example of something that was endogenous, technological, American advancement, that it was not shared with the rest of the world for a number of reasons. AI, I think, will be, and so I don't think it's going to make my thesis wrong, but I'm open to that being the case, particularly if Europe, Canada, Australia, and the rest of the world overregulates AI. There, even if you share the technology, but then somebody overregulates it, it could be bad for those economies. Okay, so I'm going to leave it here. We have some time for Q&A. As you saw from my chart pack, I think I scratched the surface. You know, so there's a lot of other things that I can talk to you about, but I'm going to leave that for the Q&A. So if you have specific questions about a specific issue going on in the world, I'm more than happy to talk about it. I just don't think that a lot of them really matter. What matters is systemic forces, and we're transitioning to a multipolar world. It's a world where the word diversification or promiscuity are very important two words, and your portfolio should reflect the same thing. That's all I would say. Now, I only say that because they're not, okay? Because they're massively overweight U.S. right now, and we all know it. If the situation was different, my view would be different. There would be no need to diversify if it's already diversified. Thank you. OK. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? En français, c'est pas problème pour moi. C'est mieux après un verre de vin, mais... Yes.
Amazing. How do you see Canadian-U.S. relationship? Not from, is it Trump, only for Trump, or are you going to see that's a secular change?
You know, I'm an immigrant to Canada. My hardware is Serbian, but my operating system is British Columbian. Although my children know the blue screen of death does come often, and then the Serb comes out, so you got to be careful. So I've thought about this question for a very long time, and I always found it very endearing and kind of funny, being from where I am, that the Canadians are so complacent about the obvious biggest geopolitical risk. It's not like Russians are not going to walk across the Arctic, neither are the Chinese. The United States of America and Canada have not always been friends. You can see a number of fortresses and little, forts all along from here to Sherbrooke and down. So the reality here is that geography means nothing, okay? We're not playing Civ 4 on a computer. It's not 1834. It's 2025. And so just because you're next to a country doesn't mean you have to be addicted to it. South Korea became an advanced economy by trading almost exclusively with countries that are half a planet away from it. for most of its economic development because China was a Maoist, basket case, and North Korea wanted to kill them. So who did South Korea trade with? The West, including the U.S., and of course Japan and others. But the point is that geographical proximity doesn't mean a lot. And so I think that the best thing that ever happened to Canada was Donald Trump, the second coming, truly the best, because it's finally woken up Canada to the fact that it needs to, diversify and be promiscuous. Okay, those are the two things that you have to do in a multipolar world. Now, I'll show you a country that's figured this out very, very well. I'm not saying that Canada hasn't. I think the government is doing the right things. And not being too open about it, obviously. Just do it quietly. But Albanese government in Australia has massively changed the trajectory. My Australian friends, I have a lot of clients there, big institutional investment community. I would always tell them the same things. This is the worst performing country on my index of proper geopolitical. When COVID happened, Australia decided to be the tip of the spear of the West. And they went out and they asked for an international investigation into how COVID started. They were like, we'll ask the Chinese to do that. And China slaps them with tariffs. My favorite chart in the world. I always show this to Australians. And so there's export of barley and oat and wine to China, and it collapses. And then there's this other country here, and it increases. And I'm like, what mean anti-Australian country selling wine to the Chinese once yours are off the market? What vile country did this? Was it the Kiwis? Did they do it? No, it's Americans. Americans are like, oh, cool, hold my beer. You want some wine? So, boom. What's the famous saying? There are no friends or enemies. They're just interests. So, I think that's the key for a Canada-U.S. relationship going forward. And by the way, one of the biggest problems, I think, in this country is this notion that Canada has to boost its defense. Australia has to boost its defense because Australia is between China and nowhere. The United States of America does not have to defend Australia. The United States of America absolutely has to defend Canada. It's back door. So I would call, if I was the premier, I would probably last three months. Maybe even less. I don't really have a filter. I would say to the Americans, I'm taking it to 0%. 0% in defense. I don't care. What are you going to do? I'm not going to use my military to defend against you because you're obviously going to crush us. So, allez-y, Okay, we have maybe a couple of more, 2 more, yes?
Thank you, Marko. That was a great presentation. Question for you. You seem to imply in your presentation that we transitioned from the unipolar system, the hegemonic American system, to the multipolar system that we're currently in as a result of the U.S. sort of no longer wanting to assume the responsibility as being the consumer of last resort, as you explained. How long do you think we stay in the multipolar system with U.S., China, India, Russia, Turkey, variety of different poles? How long do we stay in that system and in this sort of more instability, more conflicts, which leads to U.S. underperformance? And how do we potentially transition to another system?
Great questions. Okay, so different answers for different. This is very important for allocators in the room. U.S. assets will underperform while we're downloading the new operating system. So I think we're going to be in multipolarity for the rest of our lives. Nothing's going to happen. Everyone's waiting for some geopolitical guru to come to you and say who's next. No one's next. Get used to it. The last time we were in a multipolar world, it was 120 years. If you look at human history, multipolarity is the status quo. It's the last 70 years that were weird, actually. So this is going to last for the next 120 years. Is America going to underperform for the next 120 years? Not a chance. Are you kidding me? That's where American exceptionalism comes in. America is exceptional. There's great things that America does. This is just an adjustment. We're just downloading a new operating system. We're going to, the spinning thing is going to end, and then off we go. So at some point, American current account deficit will narrow, not close, no way. Well, it could half. While it's halving, I think American assets will underperform. Right, sick. And then off you go being an investor. So you don't have to necessarily obsess about this issue for too long. I think at some point you're going to go back to being an investor and investing in places that like have technological innovation. Now, the good news is I actually believe multipolarity will induce technological innovation more broadly as well. I think there'll be benefits besides this kind of silly little thing I'm talking to you about, which is very temporary. But do not confuse the length of multipolarity and American underperformance. America, in my view, just is underperforming because it's not because it's America, but because it was the asset of a unipolar world. And that asset needs to adjust its value to the multipolar reality. That will happen in 5 to 10 years. So that's the way I would answer that. But it's a question I get a lot. How long will this last? I don't know. But it's not going to be 6 months, you know? And by the way, there is a real resistance to this in the American academia and in American narratives. Foreign Affairs had an entire edition dedicated to multipolarity, so different American academics could basically poop on it. You know, and I always explain this to my American friends, like, look, this doesn't mean you're not the most powerful country in the world. You are. Hegemony, though, requires you to be head, shoulder, torso, and hips above everyone else. That's where that political science term of preponderance of power. Like you pick up the phone and like, no. And then France, United Kingdom, and Israel, like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to invade Sinai. Okay. You know, that's what happened. Look it up. That's preponderance of power. We got to deal with the Soviets. Get out. You and your friends, take your toys and go back home. That's preponderance of power. U.S. is still head and shoulder above everyone else. So this isn't about absolute levels of power. It's about that relative. And so it's a temporary adjustment to the reality we live in.
Can you talk about Ukraine a bit?
Oh, no, just kidding. The question from Claude is like, okay, but can you talk about Ukraine? This is fun, but, you know. If we can bring up the charts again, I think the Alaska summit was very important in that for the first time ever, we actually got Vladimir Putin to admit to what he actually wants. If we can just bring up, yeah. It's okay, it's not that profound, but I still want to show it. So most of the commentators in the West, they split into two kind of camps of why Putin invaded Ukraine. I'm in neither one of those. So there's the liberal kind of international view, you know, the more of the Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Harris view, which is that President Putin wants to recreate the Soviet sphere of influence. And so he's just an evil guy who's going to keep doing that. Then there's kind of the more right-leaning view. John Mersheimer is probably the most intellectual part of that, which is that, no, we incited him to do it by being mean to Russia through NATO expansion. And I think both sides miss the picture. He's just a petty guy trying to stay in power, guys. That's it. That's it. He is not good for Russia. He is not, like, actually good. He's not playing chess. He's playing checkers. He's playing geopolitical checkers. Why do I say that? He revealed it in Alaska. What did he actually ask Trump in Alaska? He said, I want that last remaining bit of Donetsk. So if I could show you on the map, which is fine, it doesn't matter if we can't, you can find it. Donbas is made up of Donetsk and Luhansk, 2 oblasts, 2 regions. For 11 years, 11, not 3, 11 years, Russia's tried to conquer Donetsk, and it's failed. So number one, you kind of tell whether I think it's a threat or not. The second issue is that that's it. That's all he asked for, really. He didn't talk about denazification of Ukraine, which is, nonsense. He didn't talk about full demilitarization because that ship sailed, buddy. And NATO expansion is the trigger for the war. Well, then why are the Finns walking around and, sipping coffees calmly? Oh, no, they're next. What? He can't conquer Donetsk, which is next to Russia, Russian-speaking. So my point here is that he just wants that piece of territory, Now, should we give it to him? Not up to me. Not up to me to say it. But I do think that you will read a lot in the press. The Economist just wrote a very detailed analysis of how the defensive installations in Donetsk are critical to Ukrainian security. That is completely and utterly wrong. Last time somebody tried to build a Maginot Line, didn't work. Look at a map of Ukraine. it is completely surrounded by Russia. Okay, if the Russians want to invade Ukraine again, they can go around some defensive installation. Zelensky is lying, but for good reasons. He's had a great teacher, Donald Trump. And he's trying to bid up the price. You want this piece of territory? I'm going to say it's existential to me, so that you give me what I want, which is continued support, security guarantees, weapons, and so on. So where do I think this war is going? Nowhere. You know? Is it going to end? Yes, absolutely. Is it going to be a peace deal? Is it going to be a frozen conflict? I don't really know. But Putin's intentions on the West are far pettier than people think. And that gives me solace and supports my view on European assets. What I don't support is the decline in defense stocks in Europe. I like it. I like to use markets to tell me what the world thinks of politics. And it's a nice sign. I get it. Things are improving. But Europeans are not buying defense stocks. They're not buying defense tools because they're afraid of Russia. They're buying them because it's a stimulus program. So if you want a trade recommendation on this thing, I would wait for those defense stocks to sell off maybe a little bit more and then just buy back into them, because that has nothing to do with Russia. That has to do with the economy and fiscal stimulus and jobs and protectionism and so on. Thank you for that question, Claude.